It worked last time. Right. What else joining? Just keep letting folks in. Hi, everyone. We're recording this, and I'm really excited that we have Rachel Murphy here with us today from Beacon Impact. And she is going to share a little bit about her role, as well as a lot of different aspects of blended finance, including climate change and gender considerations, and lots of great information that I'm sure will help you all as you're working on your proposals. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Rachel. Thank you so much for being here today.
Sure. Well, thank you to the team for inviting me today, and it's a pleasure to have the chance to speak with you all. I figured I would give a short introduction to myself and my role at Deepkin Impact, and then share a couple slides about our firm and what we do. So as I mentioned, my name is Rachel Murphy. I am the Senior Impact and Gender Officer with Deepkin Impact. We're an impact investing firm that was founded in Canada, but actually invests only in Latin America and the Caribbean. So I actually am calling in from Mexico today. I've been living in Latin America for the last 8 years or so. I lived many years in Guatemala, and now I'm living in Oaxaca in Mexico. And my journey to Deepkin Impact really started at university as well, where I first kind of came across the social entrepreneurship concept and sector, and was really kind of called to it. I worked in management consulting for several years after university, and then looked for an opportunity to work in that space, and I ended up working in Guatemala with a business accelerator, a social impact business accelerator. And so I was responsible for designing and implementing our acceleration programs for social entrepreneurs throughout Central America. And I worked there for many years, and I think as my first kind of job in this space, it was really transformational. I had the opportunity to work directly with hundreds of social entrepreneurs over the course of my years at this organization. And that was where I really identified, a passion that I have for working more closely on everything related to gender equality. It was through those acceleration programs that I noticed gender gaps in the impact and specifically impact investing sector, and how those could be addressed with thoughtfully designed products and services. And that is kind of what brought me to Deepkin Impact, which is an impact investing firm. And as the Senior Impact and Gender Officer, I do everything related to impact measurement, monitoring, and management. I support our deal flow and do everything related to impact due diligence. And importantly, I also lead our technical assistance programs, which is a really important component of our blended finance strategy. So I'll speak a little bit more about that. And so with that, I will share my slides here. Okay. Can you all see my PowerPoint? Great.
Yes.
Okay, so Deepkin Impact was founded a little over a decade ago, and it was really born out of an opportunity that the founders observed, specifically within the context of Canada, that there weren't many opportunities for individual investors to engage in impact investing, and specifically in emerging markets. And so they started kind of investing, with friends and family, and identifying and building kind of networks within Latin America and the Caribbean. The founders are from the region, and so that was a natural place to start investing. And the company has grown very quickly over the last 10 years, from those kind of initial transactions to now being a firm with 5 funds under management, a total of $145 million across those 5 funds. And over the last, 8 years or so since we've started investing, we've done over 60 investments in 17 countries, only in Latin America and the Caribbean. And we've also conducted, dozens of technical assistance engagements with our pipeline and portfolio companies, which I'll speak to a little bit more later on. And we invest primarily through two verticals or two themes that really drive kind of our investment strategy. And the first one is what we call Deacon Impact Alternative Finance. These are tailored financing structures for impact enterprises throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. There are 3 funds under this vertical, and they are sector agnostic. So we invest, everything from financial inclusion to healthcare, education, affordable housing, circular economy. And I think what's really kind of innovative about these funds is they've, this concept of tailored financing, of going beyond kind of simple, commonly used debt structures. We have, tried investing with equity in the region, and there's kind of many challenges that come with that. And so that's where this tailored financing piece comes in. And we've really been pioneers in what is called revenue-based financing. Which is, a debt instrument where that is paid back over the time as a percentage of revenues, and often kind of aligns very well with the context of a startup, an impact startup in an emerging market. And the second vertical that we invest through, there are 2 funds that are focused 100% on sustainable energy, so renewable energy, energy efficiency, and climate resilience. Of course, this is born out of the very urgent challenge that we see of climate change, and specifically in a region like Latin America and the Caribbean that is very vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And so, it's important to dedicate to that as well. So a little bit about kind of what defines us at Deacon Impact within this space. And I think on one hand, and I'll speak to this, our strategy around blended finance. So we have great experience structuring blended finance vehicles, and specifically to meet different investor risk appetites. So we've done everything from low risk impact bonds that are designed for, individual investors, to first loss facilities that can catalyze new markets. And I think that this blended finance approach is particularly important when we are investing in new sectors, or sectors that need this concessional capital in order to see those long-term results. This was also very important for us during the COVID-19 pandemic. Specifically, we designed a first loss facility to support one of our funds that was fundraising during the time. That gave investors a little bit more comfort around deploying more capital during that time. Innovative financing structures. So as I mentioned, these kind of flexible financing instruments, we really try to design transactions that make sense for our clients, for the companies, and specifically that help them to kind of scale, not only in terms of revenue, but also impact. And so we offer those kind of alternatives to what would be traditional debt and equity. Of course, as an impact investing firm, we seek to support long-term growth by investing in businesses that deliver strong financial returns, but also generate meaningful social and environmental impacts. And I think that, this is an important point. I think impact investors within the spectrum, of financial and social returns, we really sit in the middle, where we look for, companies that generate positive impact with every, dollar, right? So we look for that middle ground, and that balance between both impact and financial returns. And very importantly, we are leaders in gender lens investing. This is where I spend a lot of my time. We are committed to supporting gender equity across all of our business activities, and that includes what we call a gender lens investing strategy, and how we incorporate gender considerations at every step of our investment process to ensure that our transactions, meaningfully advance gender equality in the communities of influence. And so this is a little bit about some of the impact that we've generated over the course of these, 5 funds and 60 transactions that we've completed to date. Across our portfolio, we see that companies are employing over 8,000 people, have more than 880,000 clients. Importantly, 70% of those clients identify as women, and I think that's something that we're really proud of as we seek to invest in companies that design, products and services for women and girls, and that empower women within their own organizations. Also, half of the workforce identifies as women, and 29% rural clients. And then you can see as well that we've made a significant impact in renewable energy capacity and obviously CO2 emissions as well. And so I thought I would share maybe a little bit about what are some of the lessons that we've learned, and specifically as it relates to blended finance as you all are designing some of your proposals. I think blended finance is a strategy that really allows us to approach kind of those higher risk impact opportunities while matching investor risk appetites. And so again, one key example of this that I mentioned briefly is first loss facilities. So we have one fund under management that is called the ELU Women Empowerment Fund. And this fund was in an expansion phase in 2019 when the pandemic hit. We had recently received USAID funding in order to expand into new countries and new sectors. And so we were looking to fundraise from private sector as well in order to match that investment. And obviously when the pandemic hit, was when there was a lot of uncertainty in this market. Latin America and the Caribbean was particularly, I think, hit hard in terms of the private sector in terms of the COVID-19 impacts. Countries and businesses shut down and there were curfews in place. And so we really did see kind of the economic impact of the pandemic firsthand. But at the same time, many of the companies that we had already invested in were needing more capital in order to, implement, new measures to respond to the pandemic, to support their clients that were in need of more financing or more products and services. And so, we went out to fundraise, and that was where we were hearing from investors, again, this kind of uncertainty, in terms of putting more capital on the line during this time. And so what we did is we generated a first loss facility. So one of our partners came in with a $1 million first loss facility. And once that was in place, we were able to basically unlock about $6 million of additional investment from that $1 million first loss facility. So I think that's one example of how, we haven't had to use that first loss facility. The fund has performed very well, but I think, those kinds of fund structures really do help, I think, investors to feel more comfortable. And we've also experienced those type of blended finance structures in new impact sectors as well. And it's something that we're looking to in the future as we think beyond just everything related to renewable energy and climate mitigation. And we're really interested in kind of the climate adaptation space and really how we can make a meaningful impact as climate change accelerates. And so some of those new sectors, new technologies will likely need some kind of concessional financing in order for it to be viable from a fund perspective in the short term. And that kind of leads me to the second point here, which is partnerships. We can't do any of this alone. And so those partnerships really bring not only, complementary expertise to make sure that every investment is catalytic, but really helps us to draw on, the strengths of each of us in our space in the ecosystem. So that first loss facility that I mentioned earlier that we developed during the pandemic, it was our partner, an organization, a social enterprise called Pro Mujer that came in and provided that. Pro Mujer provides financial services to women entrepreneurs, micro and small women entrepreneurs throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. We have a shared interest and passion in promoting gender equality in Latin America. And so as a partner in our fund, they came in and provided that first loss facility in order to unlock additional sources of capital. So I think it's important as you all are designing as well, again, these ideas and these proposals to think about, what can we provide, what in-house expertise or capacities do we have, and then where could we seek or draw on partnerships where we have a shared interest, a shared goal, and work together to meet the needs of different clients. Um, Thirdly, business support services. So I think these are really, really important. I can speak to this much more in detail if you all are interested, but this is what we call technical assistance, which is where we receive kind of international development funding, such as funding from USAID, in order to de-risk investments and deepen positive impacts. So specifically what this enables us to do is provide these kind of business support or advisory or consulting type services to pipeline and portfolio companies. Often that means being able to come in and address a gap that the company or the project has that is kind of inhibiting our investment. We can address that, and then we can move that company along in our pipeline and finalize the transaction. And then, if we've invested, that also enables us to work with the companies to really, improve performance, both from a business and an impact perspective. And so these can be engagements from anywhere from 6 to 12 months where we work hand in hand with the companies. We bring in subject matter experts as needed. We do everything related from, D&I strategies to impact measurement to renewable energy, technical expertise. We bring in legal experts, really depending on what the client needs. And this has been incredibly catalytic for us. And this is something that we consider a part of our blended finance strategy, because this is kind of grant funding that comes in that we are then able to deploy alongside our investment strategy. And then lastly, Gender Smart. As I've mentioned, we really focus on investment practices that empower women and that lead to better business and investment outcomes. And so everything from the screening phase for a pipeline company to understanding, what their gender impact is today and how committed is the leadership team to generating a positive impact, to assessing their impacts in depth, both in the pipeline and the monitoring phase, and then working with those companies as well to improve their gender business practices over the life of the investment. So this is what I mentioned just around the technical assistance engagements that we accompany our portfolio companies where they need it most, and that this is very catalytic. And again, this is just an example of some of the facilities that we've managed to date. And again, this important role that, blended finance plays not only, as investment funds, but also as additional technical assistance funding that supports our investment strategy. So as you can see, we've worked with USAID many times, the IDB, which is the Inter-American Development Bank. These facilities can range in size, but they are all designed to improve the fund performance, again, both from a business and an impact perspective. And these really enable us to provide these really in-depth services to our clients that otherwise really would not be possible with just, 2% management fees. So I know I've been speaking now for about 20 minutes, so maybe I'll stop there. I can dive in a little bit deeper to any of these concepts, but I figured I would pause and see if there are any questions.
Any questions out there? This is a great opportunity for you to get some questions answered to help you out with your proposals. I'll ask a question.
Go for it.
Shortage of them, but what are some of, oh wait, Siam, do you have a question? Yours are more important than mine.
I'll ask after.
All right. So when you're measuring the impacts that you're having, what are some of the biggest barriers that you've had to overcome with the impact measurements? And then what are some of the impact measurements you think are the most important that might not be the most obvious?
Yeah, I think I have, I think both of those questions I can answer with data management. I think that is our biggest challenge. Obviously, impact measurement is only as great as the data that you can provide. And I think as we look to our clients to go a little bit deeper than just talking about, number of people reached, number of clients, number of employees, and basic demographic characteristics about that, we really want to know what are kind of the long-term effects. What are the changes in quality of life? What are the changes that we observe in those communities? And that involves going much deeper around what is the data that you are collecting and how is that data being managed? And so I think that's one of the main barriers that we see, is that these teams often don't have the capacity in terms of both knowledge, but also resources in order to go out and collect and manage that data. And even if they do have the data, it is often very poorly managed. It lives in an Excel sheet somewhere. It's not very clean. It's difficult to understand. And so when you want to, generate any kind of analysis, there's a lot of cleaning that needs to go into that. And even putting the systems in place. So we've actually, through our technical assistance work, we've worked with many of our clients to design information management systems, everything from designing survey tools and data collection tools to data warehouses, to also Power BI dashboards and analytics that can help them to automatically analyze and show that data to investors and other stakeholders. But that all requires, a lot of investment and a lot of capacity building. And so I think that's definitely where we're heading as a sector, as a company, is how we can support companies to build out their data management systems, specifically as it relates to impact data.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. Sayam?
All right, there we go. Yeah, so thank you for the presentation. So I was wondering, so based on what you talked about, some of your or some of your responsibilities in your firm include like deal flow, impact due diligence, technical assistance with blended finance stuff. But I was wondering if what other sort of responsibilities do you maybe not directly oversee, but you have that you have knowledge of and are applying to your current position? And I guess to be more specific, like you said you jumped from management consulting to your current position. So is there anything that you took away from management consulting that you think is really important for the impact investment space that you currently are like using right now?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that's part of the reason why I chose management consulting, as my first career coming out of university, was really just kind of building some basic analytics skills around understanding different businesses, different markets. And I think that that's important to bring to any job. My team always laughs that like I always wear the impact hat, because that's my role as, someone that is focused on impact, is coming in and saying, this company is really interesting, it's really impactful, or I have a lot of questions, I think there's some risks here. That's always kind of what I'm emphasizing. But of course, that's something that we need to balance with the broader kind of business and market. And so I think always having that balance between understanding what are the different, both financial and non-financial aspects at play, I think is something that, from an analytical perspective, is really important to bring to our work. And so, I support, as an example, I support on the impact due diligence side of things. So understanding, who is the company's target market, who are their customers, what are their impact needs, gaps, how are their products and services thoughtfully designed to address those needs, how are they measuring those impacts, what are some of the risks to generating that impact, right? So it's all very focused on impact, but that requires me to have a very good understanding of their business model and what is their growth trajectory. So I think, just always having that holistic perspective is really important for our work, and specifically on the technical assistance side. So of course, once we've identified a need, I am responsible for designing and implementing those projects. And so that requires me to work in different areas of the business. Like I mentioned, if there's something, on the finance side of things, then one of my colleagues will come in to help build out, more detailed financial model, for example, but I need to understand what their need is and scope that engagement. I implement a lot of their work around, again, impact measurement and management, their gender strategy, community engagement. But I've had to learn a lot about the renewable energy sector and the more technical aspects of these projects, because again, I can't really support these companies unless I understand their business model. So I think that's just an important, I think, goal to always position in this work, is understanding all the different aspects of a business. And that might be related to a question I see in the chat about the technical assistance component. So how do we assess needs and decide on what services to offer? So I think I'll answer this in two parts. I think one is the actual engagements themselves with the companies, but even before that, right, is how we get the funding. And so, this is both kind of it's a grant, right? So we need to go out and look for funding. We need to develop proposals, what we call RFPs, requests for proposals. And I think there are two main approaches. One is kind of these warm approaches that we have with investors that may have, technical assistance funding, or partners that we've cultivated these relationships with, and that we can kind of together design projects that make sense. And then there are these more kind of cold opportunities, which are usually defined by the big investors or the big, providers, such as USAID. USAID, every year defines their priorities, and, they have millions of dollars across different programs, and they put those requests for proposals out, and we have to respond to those. And so that's where it's been really important for us to understand how the USAID funding works, what, kind of relationships do we need to cultivate, and often with other partners or investors as well. Because often, USAID is a program that is really, really expansive. And as investors, we're focused on one piece of it, like the capital mobilization piece, but there's maybe a regulatory element, in which we need a different partner to bring in that expertise. So that is a process that I also help manage, is actually identifying and securing the funding. And all of the funding, of course, comes with like set priorities, right? So what we ultimately do depends on what the priorities are of the grant makers. However, they have, basic elements around helping us to fundraise, and then helping us to support our portfolio or pipeline and portfolio companies. So, in order to understand, I think I can maybe give one example of a program that I'm running in El Salvador. It is a USAID funded program as well. And the focus is capital mobilization, right? Private sector capital mobilization for sustainable companies that are generating a positive impact. So we're working with renewable energy companies, sustainable manufacturing, a couple of microfinance institutions. We're supporting a number of companies in the country. And the whole idea, there are two main components. One is acceleration and one is capital mobilization. And so the acceleration is where we go in and we identify, okay, what are these companies' needs? What are their gaps? And we do this through really comprehensive assessments across all areas of the business. And this is really where I lean on my team as well from the investor perspective, where if you're evaluating this deal, what do you need to see in order to move it along in the pipeline? What is our investment committee going to come and ask about? What are our co-investors? Because we come in with, equity financing, for example, but then the senior lender, which is often a local bank, what do they need in order to move this deal along? And so that's how we identify kind of what are the greatest needs of that company. And then that's the acceleration component, and then capital mobilization, which is where we go out and we look for, capital both from our own funds, but also from third parties in order to meet the full financing needs of that organization. And so to date, we've mobilized over $18 million for the companies that we're working with in El Salvador. Only a portion of that has come from our funds, but it requires us to, again, cultivate those relationships with our peers as well, because companies often have financing needs that are beyond what we can provide or what our fund's mandate is. And so that's how we've kind of structured this program to meet those needs. On one hand, what are their needs in order to improve performance, in order to deepen impact, and move deals along, move the transactions along, and then how can we identify and source and accompany the due diligence process in order to close those deals.
Do you have any tips for the students here in terms of how would they go about identifying potential? Because between now and the end of January, they won't probably have all of the conversations they would need to have in the longer term, but potential concessional finance collaborators or partners and other private capital firms that would want to take part in their proposals.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to be specific around the ask, right? Concessional financing can come in many forms, right? I gave a few examples of how we've done it through technical assistance programs, through first loss facilities. Some, organizations can provide grants, right? Where you can really bring down kind of the return profile of the fund and invest in much more riskier opportunities. And so I think really defining what your need is in terms of understanding if you were to have some kind of blended finance structure, some kind of concessional capital, what would that be used for and how would that ultimately support your project to achieve its goals? And I think being really clear about that is quite important. And then also I think it's, grant funding is very theme specific. There are organizations that only want to support climate mitigation. There are organizations that are 100% focused on healthcare. We have people that come in and say, as a sector agnostic fund, this is great, but we're not interested at all in education. We're 100% focused on healthcare, and so this may not be a good fit. And so I think also, being clear around what are the kind of impact themes or sectors that you're interested in supporting, and then using that as the basis of your research to understand what players are in that space that can help support that. I think at the end of the day, it's all about aligning, goals and interests. And so the clearer that you can be around what your model is and why you need concessional capital and what that will ultimately help you to achieve, I think will really narrow your search and hopefully make that process, a bit more efficient once you make contact.
Fantastic, thanks.
Of course.
Other questions for your proposals? I see one is connecting to audio right now. Somebody want to share a little bit about one of your proposals and see what Rachel might be able to help you with relative to that?
I could go if no one else wants to. Yeah, I've been interested in impact investing for like the past year from where I was like introduced the entire idea, and um obviously I think it's really cool. One of our ideas for my project right now that I'm working on is setting up some sort of, I don't know exactly like how to do this, and maybe this is where you can help, but some sort of impact investment fund with some sort of financing structure that still have to hash out the details of, but that would go towards supporting like farmers, and more specifically like cocoa farmers in Trinidad and Tobago. And the reason we chose that is because in Trinidad and Tobago, like the cocoa industry has been really big for a while, but after they discovered natural gas, like the labor of the industry kind of shifted towards that. And so we want to potentially through this project, like bring it back towards the cocoa industry and also make sure that's sustainable. But not entirely sure what maybe like the best financing structure would be and where we would get the financing from so that the farmers that have like the best, most sustainable farms get like the proper funding that they need and we could like reinvigorate the industry there. So that's sort of the question.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And we're seeing a lot of focus on this space. I think from a sustainability perspective, there's a shift right now from thinking about climate mitigation and how we can just build more solar projects to a focus on adaptation and how we can help communities to adapt to the effects of climate change, to be more sustainable in their practices. And this is where the agriculture sector, I think, takes on a lot of importance. And there's a lot of focus specifically in this theme kind of in Africa and Asia. And so I think you're definitely onto something. I think that we see a lot of talk around value chains when it comes to sustainable agriculture. And so I think when you're designing your fund and specifically what types of projects or businesses you'd be interested in investing in, I think being clear about where you sit in that value chain is really important. So you've got the smallholder farmers that are the ultimate clients and beneficiaries, and you can direct investing in those companies. Of course, those would be really small transactions, and that often requires a lot of resources and a lot of on the ground kind of knowledge. And so I think making a decision around whether or not that's something that you want to do, and if not, you can identify what players are already in that space. When you move a little bit up on the value chain, then you can also think about investing in intermediaries or institutions that do provide that direct financing. So, we do a lot of investing in microfinance and specifically microfinance institutions that support smallholder farmers. And that's one way to kind of scale your impact by providing, what would be indirect financing, but that ultimately lands in the hands of your target beneficiaries. So I think defining, that target market and the type of transactions that you want to make, that will define everything. It will define how much money you need, what those transactions will look like, what networks and partnerships you need in order to build that out. So I think that on one hand, and then I think on the other hand, as you think about your fund as well, whether you're doing direct or indirect investing, I just think it's important, especially in this space, to think beyond just providing capital itself. And in order to really, if you're talking about really building out a sector and making a meaningful impact in this sector, what other non-financial needs do these clients have? And how can you structure your fund to support that? Again, either through partnerships or through providing capital itself. We only invest in microfinance institutions that provide non-financial services alongside microcredits. That's been proven to be really important for the ultimate impact. And I think especially in the agricultural space and especially in a sector such as cocoa that might require certain technical expertise, I think being able to provide that alongside a microcredit is really important to achieve your ultimate goal. So I think those are some things to think about that will ultimately define your fund's thesis, your investment mandate. And then based on that, you can kind of look outside to see what kind of funding you would need, what types of investors would fit that in order to get it off the ground.
Sounds good. And I guess like a follow-up question based on what you were talking about a little bit, but also when I was discussing this project with one of my professors, he suggested that we look into the possibility of generating carbon credits based off like one idea that he had and that has done a lot of research on was biochar, and using like the cocoa that's wasted or not going to be sold, using that and then other biomass to create biochar that could be sold for carbon credits. So I mean, we're still looking into the possibility of that happening, but in your experience, do you know if like carbon credits have been or can be like a good solution for providing financing for certain like clients such as agricultural clients, and like maybe how that would work a little bit if you know.
Yeah. So I'm certainly not an expert in this space, but I think what I can say is we've seen a resurgence of carbon credits recently. It's something that we're supporting a number of our projects, and my colleagues are working more closely on this, but specifically in the context of renewable energy projects and how they can take advantage of carbon credits to basically support the bottom line. So I think, that is a big and very formal and very regulated market that entering into the formal carbon credit market requires, hiring a specialized firm. However, I think you make a really good point as well around how, whether or not you're participating in the formal carbon credit market, but also thinking about kind of circular economy principles on the ground and how different, how you can reuse materials and potentially capitalize on those within the communities themselves. So we've done a similar project in Honduras, where we are helping in a community to build cacao farms, and we are providing not only the supplies but also the technical expertise. It's something that, unless you have a lot of experience in the space, which in Latin America, it's kind of a dying, expertise. And so bringing in experts that can help do the technical training. But we've also seen that, again, there is kind of a biomass there that the communities can take advantage of. And so I think, again, there's a lot of on-the-ground technical training that needs to go into building that out. But I think better understanding that whole value chain, that production process, I think you would certainly identify opportunities.
Awesome, thank you.
I sent you some examples directly on the cocoa industry as well. And then also I'm just putting in, if you want it, there's some interesting resources like a carbon farming calculator and things like that at the Indigo Carbon site as well, in case that's helpful to you. Pooja.
Hello. I just want to follow up on the previous question. So our project is about implementing solar panels in different parts of India that currently do not have much access to electricity. And so I was just wondering, how would you balance between like bringing private investors on board? Because I would think that like private investors would want short-term like return on their investment, whereas there's also a long-term aspect of like having a lot of social change and a lot of environmental change. So how would you balance those two between like the short-term and the long-term impacts? And what ways would you recommend bringing like private investors on board when the return on their investments are a lot more long-term than short-term?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I think, I can speak to some examples from our funds. I think it really depends on how the fund is structured and designed from the outset. If it is a fund, it sounds like you might want to be investing directly in building out these microgrids, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, so we were thinking that part of the funding would go towards setting up and installing the solar panels, and another part of the funding would go towards like helping people in the community set them up and go through training.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So maybe I can give an example of how we finance some of these similar projects in the region. We do mostly, kind of grid scale, larger projects, not so much on microgrids, but I think there are similar aspects there. So there are different investors that all have a different role in getting a project like this off the ground. And so where we sit within this value chain is we are equity investors in the renewable energy space. So that means that we come in really early stage with equity financing that is high risk, but also can potentially generate higher returns, right? So often that means that we buy common shares in the company. And that if the company does well, obviously we get a higher return, but again, we're taking on much more risk than a debt investor would. So we come in really early on in kind of the project design and development before it's even been built. We provide that initial capital that is needed to do a lot of the technical studies, to do the engineering work, to help support some of the construction, and really build out that business model. Following our investment is when we then support the companies to look for debt financing, senior lenders. And so often, these again come from kind of local banks, or it could also come from impact investors. And this is where they provide a more traditional debt structure that is more working capital for the project over time. And so again, we need both of these types of investments in order for one of these projects to work. And in terms of order of magnitude, we've seen that, I've worked with a company over the last couple of months where we came in with a $4 million equity investment. Then they unlocked $24 million in senior debt financing, and they're continuing to raise senior financing and new equity investments as well. And so just in terms of order of magnitude. Obviously, those investors, they all have different return expectations, both in terms of amount, but also timelines. So as equity investors, we have a much longer timeline. It isn't until we exit an investment, until we sell our share in the company, that we see our return. And often these projects start paying back their senior lenders long before that happens. So I think, again, balancing out those different timelines and those returns is important, as you indicated. And then I think more of the work in the community, this is where I think concessional capital comes in. And I think where grant funding can be really powerful. And it doesn't have to be a ton, right? But I think enough to design programs that can then be sustainable in the long term, that can run on their own without additional financing. But I think that is capital that should be sourced outside of kind of these traditional investments. So I hope that was helpful. I think that's just what we've seen in our portfolio of bigger projects. But I think, again, looking for that mix of financing, I think will help you to meet your goals.
Thank you so much. That was super helpful. So just so that I have the right idea, equity financing is like the initial investment into like a new idea, where the equity financing is used to like build up the idea itself even before the whole thing is implemented. And then debt financing comes in to like maintain the project over time. That would be like a sort of loan, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So the equity financing can fund a lot of those upfront costs to get a project like this off the ground. And because it's much more flexible in terms of its return structure, it means that money doesn't have to be paid back right away, right? Which is why it can be invested in some of these more bigger kind of upfront costs that then pay off over time. Whereas senior lenders come in with a much more, as if you or I were to go to the bank and ask for a loan, they would start asking for interest right away, and then we'd have to pay that back over time. So I think identifying those different sources of capital and understanding the role that those investments play in the ultimate development of the project, I think is important.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Hi, I have a question on the technical assistant aspect. I'm not sure if I caught it yet, but when you talk about technical assistance, you talk about building data management systems and a lot of other different technical assistance projects. So when you approach these different projects in these different countries, do you always bring your in-house talent to help them build and monitor these technical assistants, or you think it'll be a better idea to reach out to the technological players within that field and sort of just driving that ecosystem, where you think it's more of like coming from in-house project? And I think it would be much more complex when you assess when you approach projects in emerging markets with such vague and I think these emerging technologies. What do you think about this?
Yes, absolutely. So I think what we try to always do from Deacon Impact in terms of in-house is really understand our clients' needs and then scope out what those projects are. What do they need? How can we support them? What would a project look like in order to achieve that goal? And that's where, the collaboration, not only myself, but also our investment officers that are designing these transactions, that's where we really come together to understand our client and their needs. As it relates to kind of technological innovations or data management specifically, once we've understood what their need is and what a technical assistance project would look like, at a high level, what will we hope to achieve and what are the activities that would help us to achieve that, we then go out and look for experts. So I think we always try to find that mix of, it's important for us to cultivate the relationship with our client, to understand their needs, to be really close to these technical assistance projects. But we're an investment firm, right? We're not, our primary business is not consulting. And so recognizing when we need to bring in experts is really important and ultimately, is beneficial for our clients. So we, on the data management side, we work with a consulting company that is based in Argentina. They are, monitoring and evaluation experts, and they also have a lot of experience with data analytics. And so we've brought them in to really diagnose our company's systems, what they need. We've brought them in to build in data warehouses. We've brought them in to build in Power BI dashboards. And so they, bring in a lot of the technical expertise to do that. Obviously, we can't be experts in everything. We need to understand our company and their business model, but we need to rely on experts in the field when possible as well. And I think that's why I also emphasized the point on partnerships when you all are thinking about your proposals as well, is what will you be providing? And then what partnerships do you need to create in order to meet, the needs of your clients?
Thank you. I have a question. It's such a vague question on how like Deacon Impact started out. So now my friends and I are ideating a project that would have like three-tier approach to driving digital transformation in like sustainable agriculture. So we have our in-house consulting services and our innovative like insurance product that would act as a sort of a lifeline in case these like digital transformation projects don't end up as we expect them to be. And we also have like some different services to help them align with the regulatory aspects as well as the adapt to policies, like changing policies within our like political scheme. So we have like all of these standards, global standards coming out from the EU and like state policies that would give them like favorable fundings. And so we have businesses adapt to these like ever-changing aspect and landscape of policy. So but we're realizing that like what we're taking upon is a lot of work, especially within the consulting space when you have so many different technologies to be a part of. We have to get so many experts on that. And we're thinking of like transforming this fund into like what I think like what's similar to what would be similar to Deacon Impact, like investing, like being equity investors. So, when Deacon, started out, what kind of projects do you like invest in, and how do you get that initial deal flow?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's interesting to hear kind of your how the project has evolved. And I think you're getting to something very important, which is digital transformation is a massive undertaking. And I think being really clear on what the role is that you all want to have in that. Will you be building the technology yourself? Will you be providing financing for those who are building the technology? Will you be advising, right? And it sounds like you all are coming to some decisions on that. But I think to your question as to how Deacon Impact started out, similar to many funds is really, the founders started by just investing their own capital, small tickets, friends and family. And then obviously they really started relying on their own networks and as founders that were from Peru and Mexico. So they, were living for many, many years in Canada, but they went back to live in the region and they really build those networks up from scratch. So I think, you know, networks are not something that we all just kind of have that are ready to go. It's something that we have to build. And so I think once you have a very clear idea, again, of what you want to do and the role that you will play in this ecosystem, I think starting to map out that ecosystem, identifying who is in that space, and then being really proactive about building those relationships, I think is ultimately how to get any project or any fund off the ground.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
We're right up on time here, but if there's any last minute, 1 minute question, I also can stay on a little bit afterwards if anyone has any logistical questions about the project that they're working on.
I don't necessarily have a question, but since we're up on time, Rachel, is it okay if I reach out to you over email about something not exactly related to this project, but there's another like opportunity at the school that I go to for like impact investing? If I could reach out to you and if you're interested, that's fine.
For sure. Absolutely. I wanted to mention that before I hop off the call, that I'll put my email in the chat here. And I'd be happy to hear from you, and I can always connect you with other colleagues as well. If it's something that I don't look at specifically, so please do reach out.
Rachel, thank you so much. This was really amazing. I really appreciate your presentation and getting into the weeds on some of those questions. Thank you everyone for asking good questions today. And yeah, stay tuned for our next one will be on Friday with Anaga Pavade, who's with Total Capital Impact. So hopefully we'll see you all at that one too. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your
Rachel.
questions.
Yeah.
And we'll be in touch.
Have a great day, everybody, and evening and morning, wherever.
I had a more general question